Right, one of you with a very eagle-eyed view noticed this Dan Electro reissue Coral Sitar sitting above my Lego over there, and had the question about, how often do I play it and what sort of presets do I use. So I've been toying around with it with the Axe 3, and I basically like it with clean amps and then with delay and a little bit of like phaser, because when you see one of these things you want to hear psychedelic noises. So I've got the Fender Deluxe Reverb model dialed up, I've got a little bit of the Phase 90 going, and I've got a multi-tap delay and some reverb, and it sounds like this. So yeah, it is a super cool instrument. The only thing that I've found with it is that because of the nature of the vibrating bridge, you really have to be careful with how you set the amps up, and especially how you set up any gates that you have in there, because these don't sustain very long. So if you've got the gate set up wrong, you can kind of get this chopped off effect. But other than that, it's super cool. Well worth checking out if you're interested in getting those kind of sounds, but you don't want to learn another instrument. Had a few questions about this guitar from the Axe FX 3 demo. This is a Momose Strat, so made by Deviser Guitars in Japan, and this is their sort of vintage spec kind of thing. As you can see from the back, just a beautiful piece of timber. There's some really light flame in the neck here. This belongs to Tim from MT Guitars, and it's his personal guitar, and at the moment I'm just borrowing it to do some demos, so I think he's probably looking to move this guitar along anyway. So if you want to pick up one of these, you can chat to him, and it sounds amazing. I don't know what the pickups are in there, but I will put it in the video description. I love this neck pickup tone with, I've got the Fender Deluxe Reverb model again, this time with just a little bit of the London plate reverb. And a great tip if you're ever playing a Strat, use the tone control for the bridge pickup if it's hooked up. And if it's not, that's a really good mod, because have a listen to it. If I play with the tone on 10 on the bridge pickup, it's really glassy sounding. If I back it off to about 6, it sounds fat. Okay, string gauge for drop tunings. At the moment on my STR, I'm using Elixir 10 to 52s. I like those because the D string, rather than be just a 30 gauge, it's a 32 gauge. And I find that just adds enough kind of chunk or something. I can't think of a better adjective to describe it, but having a slightly heavier D string, having an 18 for the G kind of balances everything else out. And it's really important that you get your guitar set up if you are going to use, drop tunings like drop B or drop C. 52 is the absolute lightest I would use, and I just get it because it's easier to find the strings. So it's, it's not this kind of like quest. If I am, doing a gig somewhere out of town, or if I'm on tour or anything like that, I know I can always get 10 to 52s as a sort of last resort kind of thing. So that's basically why I use 10 to 52s. It's sort of like just a pure matter of being pragmatic about it. But you could easily go to like a 60 gauge on the bottom, and I've played a guitar set up in drop C with 12 to 60s and it sounds awesome. But if your guitar's set up right, yeah, you can use 10 to 52s easily. And at the moment on the Axe 3, I've got the Recto and the new 2018 BEC 45, this is just so chunky. Okay, this is a really good question. What is my opinion of Greenbacks for metal? Well, if you like vintage 30 speakers for metal, there's no reason why you wouldn't like Greenbacks. Overall, I think Greenbacks is sort of like, they have this reputation of being a vintage style speaker, right? But that to me just means they have more of a well-defined mid-range than the vintage 30, and they have a different resonant peak in the high mid. So in order to answer that question, I've got two ML Audio cab packs, one which is old vintage 30s in a Mesa Recto cab, and then we've got a set of Greenbacks. Of course, the cabinet choice, as well as the microphone choice and all the other stuff down the line is going to make a big difference, but it's nice comparing IRs from two manufacturers, not from two manufacturers, but it's nice comparing impulse responses from the same manufacturer, because the same mics, it's the same preamps, it's the same mic position. So hopefully this gives you an idea that yes, you can definitely use Greenbacks for metal, and I think that's becoming a pretty hip thing at the moment as people look for other options other than the vintage 30. Check it out. This is a pretty cool question. What is my most memorable live gig and why? I think for me, the last time Ragdoll went into the States, we were over there in 2016, and that particular year we put out the album Back to Zero, and we already had some tour stuff lined up for the end of the year in Europe, which was pretty exciting. And we managed to sort of swing it so that we could make it over for a few shows in the States and then do the eastern states of Australia at the same time. The eastern states of Australia, you know, to give you guys perspective, I'm in Perth, which is like being in San Diego, and then everything else that's in Australia is on the other side. So it's like, I'm in San Diego, everything else is in like New York and Florida, and there's not much in the middle, so it's not like you can just sort of get out and tour profitably. So we managed to do that little tour where we went to the States and then we did the East Coast sort of on the way back home. But we played the Rocklahoma Festival over there, and it was particularly memorable for me for a few reasons. One, because we were only there for about a week, we didn't want to get super jet lagged when we came back, because we know that we had tour dates on the eastern states and we had a bunch of tour dates over here in and around Perth. And we didn't want to get jet lagged when we came back, so we just stayed on Perth time. So we were getting up at like, 5 p.m. and going to bed at like 6 a.m. So we're totally out of whack with the time difference. So that was one thing, which was weird, walking to like, a Chili's in a really small town and getting breakfast at like 6 at night. So that was cool. And then obviously you're hanging out with other bands, you're having a good time. It was really, really fun. But the memorable part for me anyway is the Scorpions headline the night that we played. So I sat there and I watched the Scorpions. They did this amazing set. They played all my favorite songs. And then about 45 minutes after they finished, we started our set. So we started at like 1 in the morning, and the band who was playing that slot that sort of like overlapped with the Scorpions and before us, they played over, made a bunch of gear that they were kind of running off stage, and I'd only just moved to an Axe-Fx rig at that point, so that really helps. But it was great because it was the most stress-free kind of gig, Scorpions had played, the festival had sort of reached its apex, and then there were just heaps of people hanging around waiting for us to go on. And while we were sound checking and the drums were getting set up, we sort of got this crowd chant going, and I was just playing riffs from different bands, and it was a really fun, no pressure kind of sound check. And then heaps of people stuck around, and then we played really, really well. And I think it's probably the best show that we've ever played, this sort of festival after the headliner kind of slot. It was really, really amazing. There's footage from the show up on YouTube, but here's a little sneak peek of why I had so much fun at that gig.
Alright, all good to go.
How you guys doing tonight?
1
do I think of Polyphia? I've actually been getting into a little bit of that stuff recently, like Polyphia, Pliny, Jason Richardson, all that kind of stuff. Mostly because the guys who's doing incredible stuff. It's just wicked chop busting stuff. I'm trying to practice some of that stuff. And yeah, I think with Polyphia, like a lot of people mention, they kind of have these like really interesting twangy tones going on for such a heavy sort of band. So it's using like split coil positions on humbucker equipped guitars. And I remember one of my students who's really into periphery, he has a Mayonnaise 8-string, and he was sort of explained to me, he's like, yeah, you can use it on the humbucker mode, but the real trick to get that sound is use, you know, split the coils and then use the middle position. So I don't really have a guitar set up like that. This guitar does have a P90 in the neck and a humbucker in the bridge, and when you put it on both, you kind of get this. But that's a way fatter sound than they're using. So yeah, I might have to put a little bit of work in and maybe try to put out like a preset or a video breakdown once I figure out how to do that. But for me, I play in a one guitar band, so I prefer those kind of like, you know, really fat, you know, big lower mid-range kind of tones. I forget who asked this question, but someone was asking me about what a ski jump is on a fretboard. So I went down and visited my buddy Tim at MT Guitars, and he did his best to explain it to me. Let's check it out. So the blue line is the truss rod, and the grey represents
where the neck relief should be, and the greys.
And then the red line is what?
Oh, that's just your fret heights and everything like that. But the grey represents the fretboard, and you can see how that kicks up.
Right.
So if we did a fret dress there, those 1.2 frets would be down to 1 mil, and then it would choke, and it'd be 0.3 of a mil came off this fretboard.
So essentially, it's, you know, before you can get the frets right, you need to get the fingerboard right.
So we close that, open that, go there, and that's after it's planed.
Oh, look at that.
So ski jump's gone.
And you're pulling way less off the frets, hey?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Amazing. Okay, regarding the amp comparison stuff, I think one of the hardest elements to get right is the impulse response. So if you want to compare a real amp to the Axe-Fx or the Kemper or the amplifier or the Helix or anything like that, the best way to do it, I think, is to use a load box. I've got the Fractal X load, or you can use the 2-note stuff or a bunch of other things. So get your real amp and run it into the load box, and then run the load box into your modeler, and then that way you can set up like a scene or a snapshot where you can compare the two just side by side. And I would recommend basically, I did this with one of my recto comparison videos where it's like, you just set it up onto a button so that you can A/B between them, and you don't look at it and you randomly press a button a bunch of times, so that way you have a good idea of like a blind test. I think that's the best way. If you're trying to compare like an amp modeling here with one of the built-in IRs, and then you're out there trying to mic a cabinet, I don't think you're ever going to get close, because the IR is such a sort of precise, accurate measurement of the speaker. Any small discrepancies that you can't get right in your setup, I mean, even probably like the temperature of the air and things like that is going to affect it. So I would definitely recommend using a load box with your head if you want to do sort of amp comparison stuff. That seems to be the cleanest, easiest way to do it. Or run your modeler into a power amp and then into a cabinet and use the same cab and mic. So talking about strat necks with girth, that's a good question. I remember a buddy of mine who has like giant hands. He ordered an extra wide neck from Warmouth, so I know that they can definitely do the extra wide necks. It really depends what you want, because I always feel that sometimes the idea of like a club neck on a guitar, the idea is nicer than the reality, because it can help cramp your hand and things like that. So yeah, what I would recommend is maybe go and play a bunch of different guitars in guitar stores. Be that guy, just play all the guitars and don't buy anything. Find out what the neck shape is, or take some measurements, and then get in touch with a company like Warmouth, or there's a bunch of other parts manufacturers out there who can probably just CNC you a neck, and make sure that it retrofits, and that you can get somebody to set the neck up properly for you once you've put it on, and you know, if it needs a shim, and get the neck angle right and things like that. And then yeah, you can get your girthy strat neck and you can have lots of fun, especially if you've got super large hands. And you know what they say about people with large hands?
They wear large gloves.
They wear large gloves. Okay, I posted that Axe-Fx 3 unboxing video, and a lot of you had comments which were like, oh no, does that mean that you're not going to be making AX8 tutorials anymore? And well, I haven't got rid of my AX8, it's sitting right behind me, and I have this list in my head that's like still on, it seems endless, of tutorials that I want to do with that thing. And there's so many cool functions, so many tricks that I am still going to be making the AX8 tutorials. It might slow down a little bit over the next couple of weeks, but I hope to at least be doing 2 or 3 a week until, you know, that unit, nobody owns one anymore. So yeah, the AX8 tutorials are definitely still going to come. Somebody had to ask this question. The Axe-Fx 3, does it gent? Thanks for tuning in, guys. I will see you all next week. Get your questions in the comments, and if you enjoy the channel, please hit subscribe.